So, what did you do with your spring break? Me? I went hiking in Grand Canyon National Park and I took a lot of photographs. Hello and welcome to 5 Minute Photo. I'm Bill Ferris. In this episode, I'm going to share with you some photographs from a recent backpacking trip I took in Grand Canyon National Park. Now, the reason I want to share these photographs with you is because the experience confirmed for me my thinking about essential gear and techniques for taking good landscape photographs, particularly when you're limited in the gear that you can have with you, such as when backpacking in a wilderness area. So let's get to the photos. This first photograph is of the man who organized the backpacking trip, Dennis Foster. He's a good friend of mine. We've been hiking together since about 2006. In this shot, he's walking across the Black Bridge. This is one of two bridges spanning the Colorado River in Grand Canyon National Park. And if you're hiking in the corridor area, the most popular area of the canyon, you're likely to cross one of these bridges as you head to Phantom Ranch and Bright Angel Campground at the bottom of the canyon. So I wanted to give Dennis his props for organizing a great hike and inviting me to join him for that experience. This next photograph I made our first night in the canyon. This is where we camped on the Tonto Plateau along Clear Creek Trail, and it features Zoroaster Temple. I'm including this photograph because it is a tripod-mounted exposure of Zoroaster. For me, one of the essential pieces of equipment in landscape photography is a tripod, and while managing weight is one of the most important and critical issues and tasks that you'll have while backpacking anywhere, especially in a wilderness area, I always allow for strapping my travel tripod onto my pack and bringing it with me when going on one of these trips, because I want to do photography at those golden hour times or even after dark at night, doing night sky imaging. And having a tripod and allowing a solid platform during lengthy exposures is critical to getting good photographs under those conditions. This next photograph is of the third person who was in our party. His name is John Eastwood, and I took this while we were on a day hike in Vishnu Canyon. Vishnu is a side canyon that empties into the Colorado River. We spent 2 nights and parts of 3 days in Vishnu on this backpacking trip. And during this day hike, we were descending after we had bypassed a large dry fall and getting back into the creek bed in Vishnu. And while we were descending the slope that led to the creek bed, I looked to my left, and there John was standing on this rock outcrop, looking quite regal. So I included this photograph because I think it captures a lot of that great feeling that a person has when going backpacking in a wilderness area. The fourth photograph is of a hummingbird's nest. This was in a redbud tree at our campsite in Vishnu Canyon. Dennis pointed it out to me. They're really tiny, and so I had to get very close with the camera and lens in order to make this photograph. And even as close as I was able to get, I did quite a bit of cropping to get the framing that I like. Now, why did I have to do so much cropping? Because on this trip I brought one camera body and one lens, my Nikon D610 with a Nikon 16 to 35 millimeter f4 wide-angle zoom. I brought only the camera body and only the one lens to help manage weight, and also because when I'm doing landscape photography, the kinds of images that I enjoy making are the wide-angle, dramatic views, and this is a lens that would allow me to do that. So this photograph of the hummingbird's nest, it's such a delicate item. You can see in the strands and fibers that the bird uses to make the nest just how delicate it is. During our 3-day stay in Vishnu, I was able to get out with the camera and the tripod for a morning and also for an evening, just to do photography within the narrows of Vishnu Canyon. And this is one of my favorite exposures from those excursions. You can get the narrow, confining feeling of this part of the canyon. There's great color and line and texture, and the stone that makes up the walls of the canyon. I like the gravel bed on the floor, the little bit of green with the shrub that's growing out of the wall of the canyon. And then off in the distance, you can see rising up above the horizon and catching that late day light, a distance monument within Grand Canyon. And this is, again, it's a tripod mounted shot and one of my favorite exposures from this backpacking trip. And here's a photograph from the campsite we had on the 6th night in the canyon. This was our next to last night in the canyon. We had left Vishnu Canyon that morning and hiked over to the head of 83 Mile Canyon below Angel's Gate. And after setting up camp, I pulled out the camera and the tripod and made this photograph. You can see that the late day light, that golden hour light, is painting the stone and bringing out those earthy hues. There's a little bit of shadow that's creeping in as the sun is setting off to the west. And I just like the curve and the different textures of the smooth blue sky against the rough stony hue of Angel's Gate, and the kind of interesting texture of the shadowy area where we made camp. And then later the next morning, I made this next exposure. This was after we had awakened. In fact, we were getting up pretty early to hike early in the day before it got too hot. And so while my hiking partner Dennis was striking his camp and packing up, I made this timed exposure. It's a 30-second exposure looking off to the east as the summer Milky Way is rising over Angel's Gate. And you can see Angel's Gate there in silhouette. And Dennis's headlamp is illuminating the place where he had set up and made camp the night before. I wasn't planning or intending necessarily to capture Dennis's work in this timed exposure, but once I saw it happening, I realized, oh, this is going to be a really cool element of this photograph. And again, because of that interesting element of the activity of the backpacker getting his camp packed up for the day, it's one of my favorite exposures. Later that day, our 7th day of an 8-day hike, we walked up Clear Creek in the canyon. And perhaps the defining iconic feature of Clear Creek is this 10-foot waterfall. You can see the way the water rebounds off the stone. There's one stream that reflects or rebounds sideways across the rest of the flow. And you see a lot of photographs of this fall, but not many that are timed exposures. This is a situation where once we got to the waterfall, this part of the canyon was completely in shade. And so I was able to use my camera at f/16 and set the ISO to 100, the base ISO for the D610 body, and force the exposure to be almost a second in length, which gives the water this beautiful feathery texture to it, and just reinforces the importance, the value of having a tripod along, even when you're in the backcountry and working very hard to keep your weight down, but also wanting to bring that essential equipment. A tripod is essential equipment for making great landscape photographs. Later that same day, I made this photograph, and this was from the place where we eventually made camp that evening. And you can see here in this image, Dennis is hiking along a stony ridge. And there's some late afternoon golden hour light that's painting a Tapeats rock outcrop. And I think it does a wonderful job of showing the ruggedness and the challenge of hiking and backpacking in a place like Grand Canyon. And the last photograph I'll share with you is this one. It was made the morning of our last day as we had awoken before sunrise, As Dennis and John were breaking camp, I set up my camera on the tripod and made a number of 30-second exposures, again to make night sky shots. It was a beautiful view of the summer Milky Way rising off to the east. And I will tell you this, I think a pristine dark night sky is one of the true gems of a wilderness area. And one of the most important things that we preserve with the national park system in the United States. So the next time you travel to a national park, certainly enjoy the dynamic wilderness beauty that's available during the day or at sunrise or sunset. But don't forget to take advantage of the opportunity to step outside at night and lose yourself in that starry canopy. It's one of the true glories of having access to the national parks, particularly those in the American West. Well, thank you for watching this episode of 5 Minute Photo. I hope you enjoyed the photographs from my recent backpacking trip in Grand Canyon National Park. And I would encourage you to get out and go camping, spend a night or two out in the wilderness area, make your own landscape photos, enjoy a dark night sky, and share those images with your friends. Well, thank you again for watching. I'm Bill Ferris, and I'll see you next time on 5 Minute Photo.